Well, if you've been looking at the polling, or at least the polling intentions recently, Labour has once again shot up the vote rankings incredibly much so. It's honestly quite shocking that we are doing this well, and it's incredible. It's not a bad thing. It's incredible that we are, but we are here because of just how bad the Tories are. Um, let's face it, that's the real reason why we are really doing so well. Even people are now starting to say in another poll that came out this week that they would prefer Keir Starmer over Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. And of course, the voting intention at the moment is well over 50%. I think it was like 51, 52%, which is massive. With the Conservatives dropping down almost to 24%. The potential for a absolute landslide of where the Tories basically go into a parliament with like almost less than 100 MPs. It's just unbelievable to think about, but that's a situation that we could be in. And I've said this before, there must be a moment where we as progressives can take this opportunity to really look at what we could get done during this time period. Because I'll tell you now, it is probably going to take the Tories, if not more than a decade, to really sort themselves out, because they are not going to fix their party anytime soon. They're going to be infighting at least for the next 5 to 6 years. And even then, after that, who can sort of bring themselves out of the mess that they've got into? And even then, there is a possibility of them just re-emerging into more infighting. And of course, as always, when these Tories get desperate, one of the things that the Brexiteer Tory MP always comes out with, oh, well, you've got to start talking up the benefits of Brexit. Bear in mind, what was it now? A week ago, 2 weeks ago, we did John Redwood's fantasy fiction Brexit piece from Conservative Home, which he teased that there was going to be a part two where he was going to come out with all these Brexit benefits, telling what the UK has actually gained, what it's benefited from the UK. We're still waiting on that. And to be honest, I highly doubt that there is going to be a part two. But this is the level that they reached. You've got to start talking up Brexit, but you've got to actually have something to show for it. And as we've always said, and we've always made the point very clear, there is no upsides to Brexit. There is nothing. There has been no positives about it. It has brought the UK absolutely nothing. It has only damaged the UK, which was always our point of what Brexit was going to do. This Project Fear has actually become Project Reality, and we are seeing it happen in real time, what it has done to the UK economically, politically, foreign policy wise, domestic policy wise. And we always said the UK had its problems, but none of those problems were caused by the EU. It was caused by our government. And if we were to do Brexit, which in case we did, it was just a brick put on the accelerator of all those problems. It was only going to make those problems worse. And what has it done? Made all these problems worse. So we're going to go over today to the Daily Express, because that's where you go, where you want, these people crying about desperation about what the Tory party needs to do, or else, well, complete electoral collapse. So before we go diving into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and an annotation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And of course, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. So over we go to the Daily Express with the title of Rishi Sunak warned, start talking up Brexit or Tories could face electoral collapse. So the Prime Minister has been warned that he must start talking up the positives of Brexit Britain or face election disaster. Again, what positives are there of Brexit Britain? There really aren't any. with 2 polls revealing that the Tories are heading for an electoral wipeout with potentially less than 100 seats, desperate Conservative MPs have warned Mr. Sunak that he has to move off the gloom and doom agenda of Remain and Labour. here's the thing. I've always said you can get more done with hope than you can with negativity in politics, but you do have to look at the reality and you have to be realistic. And the thing is, the UK is not in a good state at the moment. So it's not the doom and gloom agenda of the Remainers and Labour, it's the reality of what has been 13 years of absolute failure of Conservative policy leading to Brexit, which has made things even worse. So Bassett Law MP Brendan Clark-Smith, who was one of the Tories to break the Labour red wall and now chairs the blue collar Conservative group, told the Daily Express, again, yet another Conservative breakaway faction, and probably someone else who's probably going to lose their seat at the next election. He said, we've got to remember what won us an enormous majority in 2019. We are the party of Brexit and opportunity. Here's the thing. You've done Brexit. You promised, even at the 2019 election, and of course in the referendum, you promised that Brexit would bring in all these massive opportunities. You oversold Brexit, and that was one thing we were saying since 2016. It's going to be the downfall of the Brexiteers that they oversold Brexit. They oversold the positivity of Brexit, because sooner or later you can be as positive as you want, but sooner or later reality comes knocking on your door. You cannot escape it. And this is the situation where they are. They can be as positive and dreaming as opportunity as they want. But the reality is Brexit has done nothing to benefit the UK. But anyway, he continues. He said, we are positive about this country's achievements and its potential to win. And it's potentially, especially with Brexit. Again, what are these potential opportunities? This is where Brexiteers always talk down, always fail. They go, oh, there's all these potential opportunities. Well, what are these potential opportunities? They don't want to say what they are because they know no one in their right mind would ever vote for them. We're talking massive deregulation of products, of services, workers' rights, community, all these stuff that we've fought so hard for years, and yet they want to get rid of them because they're free market fundamentalists who do not want the government involved at all in any sort of market regulation. Singapore on the Thames, the no regulation, low tax UK, which no one would vote for, which, by the way, includes getting rid of the NHS, although they won't openly say that. But by the rhetoric, it's pretty obvious they want to get rid of the NHS. But he continues, we have to start talking up Brexit and Britain again, not just accept the doom and gloom narrative of the lefty Remainers. Well, here's the thing. It's not a doom and gloom narrative. It's the reality of the situation of where we are now. And it is caused by Brendan Clark-Smith's party. It's 13 years of failure of Tory rule, it's austerity, it's failure after failure of policy decisions that the Tories have taken. It's a complete failure of their own flagship policy of Brexit, because it promised to do all these things, and yet they can't even decide, now that they've done Brexit, what Brexit actually means within the Conservative Party. That's why it was so unified up until Boris Johnson got Brexit done. And now you've got someone like Kimi Badenoch, who, again, pro-Brexit, but then doesn't want to do the insane Brexit free market fundamentalism of just wipe out all EU legislation, because we've said that would what that would result in. It would result in massive black holes in our legislative books and create who knows what kind of loopholes within our laws and regulations. And not only that, we have built on the EU laws and regulations. So, as I've said before, it would be like having a house and then just saying, don't like the foundations anymore, getting rid of the foundations. What do you think is going to happen to the rest of the house? So, polling now suggests that over 40% believe that the UK could rejoin the EU. And Rishi Sunak needs to talk up the Brexit Britain, according to MPs. Meanwhile, the Techni, I think that's how you say it, the UK tracker poll for the Daily Express revealed that only a third of 2016 Leave voters, that's 34%, would vote Conservative, while 44 of those percent actually backed the party in 2019 have abandoned them. Mostly because, once again, the Conservatives made promises that they did not fulfill and that they have completely gone back on, or they've, quote, fulfilled them. They've leveled up these left behind areas. Meanwhile, all they've done is given these areas a pittance that solved none of these deep underlying economic and social issues that those areas are facing. Yeah, that's leveling up, guys. So, former Brexit minister, now the deputy chairman of the European Research Group of Tory MPs, David Jones, was very blunt in his message to the struggling Sunak government, failing to make the positive case for Brexit. It's not just failing to make the positive case for Brexit, there is no positive case for Brexit. And this is why they will always fail for this, because you can say Brexit's good, Brexit's good, Brexit's good, but eventually at the end of the day, you actually have to start saying what you want to do and the policies that would you want to bring in. And as I've said, they're free market fundamentalists. We know exactly the type of policies and the deregulation agenda that they would want to go on. We saw that in part with Truss, where she pretty much crashed the economy and then, well, almost destroyed the UK's pension industry. Do you really want a full government really committed to that sort of full-on agenda? Again, no one would have voted for Brexit had they generally told the truth about what they intended to do with the UK once they generally left the EU. So, writing for the Express today, he warned that scarcely a day goes by when some prominent Europhile is not blaming Brexit for all the ills of the world and urging us to return to the orbit of Brussels. But Brexit has caused a lot of problems for the UK. And it's Brexiteers that continue to ignore the elephant in the room. You cannot just continue to ignore this, but they are denying reality because, again, according to their ideology, Brexit is this perfect, idol that cannot be tarnished in any single way. But he continues. A couple of weeks ago, Labor's David Lammy was proclaiming that a close relationship with the EU would be a number one priority for the Starmer government. Again, good. It's what we need. And of course, earlier this week, my Conservative colleague Tobias Ellwood was calling for the UK to rejoin the single market on the grounds that Brexit has failed. So we've said before, Tobias Ellwood, currently really one of the only Tories out there really saying that message that Brexit has failed. And I think eventually you will see a fight within the Tory party over Brexit. The ones that want to sort of continue with Brexit, but then don't really know what they want to do it, they'll just start fighting against themselves like they are at the moment. And then eventually a faction will form of saying that Brexit has failed and we need to rejoin the single market. Because remember, that was the Leave position. After all, we would remain in the single market and customs union, but we've ended up with Boris Johnson's terrible, awful, oven-ready deal that pushed pretty much for the hardest Brexit possible. And even now, these crazy Brexiteers are still saying that that is not enough. So, sorry, here we are. He went on. The Remainers' plan, no doubt, is to keep pumping out this gloomy narrative until the British people decide that Brexit isn't worth the candle and demand to return to the tender embraces of Ursula von der Leyen and Emmanuel Macron. It's not that will eventually happen, because it's you guys who actually have to prove that Brexit's working, or actually start to say your ideas, your policies that you want to bring in, but you don't say anything about that. And it's, once again, it's not this gloomy narrative, it's the reality narrative of what is really happening to the UK economically, and how all this opportunity is being cut off in terms of trade and all kinds of stuff that is affecting because of Brexit. Everything that was, we warned you about, and that you said, don't worry about, because we'll replace all these funds. We'll make sure that all these left behind areas get the same amount of funding. None of it's happened. None of the promises that the Leavers clung to, or even the Brexiteers proclaimed for years, has even happened. But he listed a string of successes, including the vaccine rollout. Once again, we know the vaccine rollout was not a, quote, Brexit success, as much as they want to try and trumpet it as it is. Its leadership over Ukraine, again, that's got nothing to do with Brexit. And remember, Ukraine is pretty much fighting to join the EU. After this, after the war, it will end up probably rejoining the EU. And its trade deals, pointedly adding, I'm proud of Brexit, and I don't share the despondent message that the rejoiners are putting about. I know the government ministers feel the same way too, and I just wish they'd say it more often. Well, again, these trade deals haven't really been good. The Australian and the New Zealand trade deal is absolutely abysmal. It's going to actually destroy UK farming. The Pacific Partnership deal is nothing. It's worth practically nothing. They had to boost the figure to 0.08, when in reality it was more something like 0.02. It's worth nothing to our economy. And meanwhile, all those other countries that are in the Pacific Partnership can send anything, even if it doesn't meet our standards, because in the Pacific Partnership, it is not about everyone being on the same hymn sheet. It is everyone recognizing that even if you've got lower standards or lower product standards, you can still send stuff here. Again, the palm oil is a classic, is the number one example at the moment of this from Malaysia. Everything else and all our regulations say that should be banned, but under the Pacific Partnership, they can send that here. And I've said it again, I think trade deals, because you can look around the rest of the world and trade deals are big politics. They are a big factor in any other country's politics. They're about to probably come back again. And it is going to be that Brexit has failed, that all these Brexit trade deals, because they are being very much sold as, look at all these fantastic Brexit trade deals that we did, that they're not really bringing any economic benefit to the UK, that they're doing the exact opposite. So, however, a Downing Street spokesperson insisted that the Prime Minister, who supported Leave in 2016, has been talking about the benefits of Brexit and putting them into action. Well, hasn't really been doing them. She said, just look at the long-term workforce plan and some of the reform agenda in it. Again, long-term workforce plan? Yeah. If we hadn't left the EU, we wouldn't have been able to change the nurse training from 5 years to 4 years because of EU rules. Okay, so you're going to train nurses in 4 years instead of 5. Is that going to create better nurses, or is it going to create worse nurses? Is that extra year actually quite crucial to the training of someone who is a nurse? Just, shortening the time from 5 years to 4 years doesn't potentially strike me with confidence, especially someone who is a nurse and probably might benefit massively and become a better nurse from that extra year. So, the Prime Minister, of course, is talking all that up. in a press conference last week, which again did not go down well. The retained EU law bill allowing the UK to get rid of EU regulations was passed without any rebellion. That's again not true. It has been massively changed and watered down, very much so. And even now, departments are basically not going to get rid of EU legislation, because if we do start to do that, if we do start to diverge, that's going to cause even more problems when we want to trade with the EU, our closest trading partner. She also pointed out that the Prime Minister championed the creation of free ports. Again, free ports are not a really good Brexit benefit. They are massive, massive negatives. The free port that's being built up in the north, the flagship free port, having a ton of crony and capitalism, crony capitalist problems in about it. Ultimately, it is going to become a massive scandal magnet. And if that is the flagship project, doesn't send very good vibes to the rest of the free ports. Not only that, as we said before, there's a chance that this free port really doesn't end up creating new jobs. All it does is encourage companies to move from one side of the outside of the free port to inside the free port just to gain benefits. And again, it doesn't bring any good benefits. So, along with Britain's quote many, but they can't say what they are, Brexit successors are the rapid rollout of the vaccine free from EU bureaucracy. Again, that's not true. The Trans-Pacific trade deal with 11 of the world's fastest growing economies. Again, we've explained why that is and why that's not, because again, they are developing economies, because of course they are the developing economies. It's a false narrative to say that, oh, look how fast these economies are growing. It's not. They're developing economies. And it's really bad that to say that they are the fastest growing when they're not, because sooner or later these economies will plateau, and then eventually, again, according to the logic of these Brexiteers, we should leave the Trans-Pacific deal, because after all, they're no longer fastest growing economies. We should leave and join another economic trade bloc. The 20 quote enormous deals with the US states for Britain's services industry. Again, they do nothing. They do not benefit the service industry in the UK at all. They are just memorandums of understanding. They do nothing. And unless you actually have a US trade deal, even then they count for nothing. It's just for show, to try and say that they are getting some sort of trade deal. It's all for show. And of course, not having to pay the 80 billion to the EU bailout fund. Again, that bailout fund, if we had paid the 80 billion, we would have also got massive benefits from that. We would have been reciprocating from that bailout fund. The trade deals with Australia and New Zealand, again, they are not that good, to be honest. Again, Australia and New Zealand are on the far side of the world. And ultimately, at the end of the day, farmers are going to mobilize against these deals and want them changed or completely got rid of. That's just how it's going to happen. It's how it's going to go down. I know we've always said these trade deals, again, you look around the world, massive, massive central plank of many politics around the world. And of course, the new mutual recognition deal with Brazil. That one's, I have to say, is actually new. I do not actually know anything about this mutual recognition deal. And again, what are we mutually recognizing? Are we accepting that Brazil has lower standards than us and we're going to accept products from them? Because that's going to cause a big problem if you're saying, yeah, we'll accept your lower standards. That's going to cause a big problem. Chris Hayward, the policy chairman for the City of London Corporation, revealed that there are now, quote, thousands of extra jobs in the city as a result of Brexit. I wouldn't say that, because we've seen the exact opposite of cities leaving that. So again, I think source needs to be cited that there are these thousands of extra jobs. And I think mainly in the city, probably in the service industry, because after all, we've lost a lot of access to EU labour, mostly who would work in the service industries. mostly in the food and hospitality industry, shall we say, in that service industry sector. And that's where probably those thousands of extra jobs technically come from. Hayward cited the UK's continued pull post Brexit was the quote WE soda, the world's largest producer of natural soda ash, making it its debut on the London Stock Exchange. And the initial public shares is offered to expect to raise at least 645 million. Okay, you've got someone new in the London Stock Exchange, but you've had other companies leaving the London Stock Exchange to go and list on the New York Stock Exchange because they've lost faith in the FTSE. And of course, adding to that, he pointed out last month's Canada's largest asset managers, Alberta Investment Management Company, announced plans to more than double its headcount in London and invest billions into the UK as they hailed London as more a gateway to Asia and Europe than New York. Again, just because you have these bankers who are now going to be up at literally ridiculous o'clock, like I say, you had Kimi Badnoch had to wake up at like 2 or 3 in the morning just to be able to speak to her counterparts in Asia. Um, it's not really that good. And again, these investment management companies, they're not really creating the type of jobs that we need in the UK. But there you go. Similar recent moves from other larger global investors include the £102 billion Australian supranational fund Aware Super. Once again, these funds might be coming to the UK, but those money that they own not actually going to the UK. We are seeing investment slump. We are seeing investment go out of the UK. So even if they come to the UK, probably to take advantage of certainly Rishi Sunak lowering the investor capitalism laws and things that we've seen very recently, the Edinburgh reforms, doesn't mean that all that investment is going to come into the UK. So you can say all these asset management firms are moving into the UK, but it doesn't really mean anything in the long run. It doesn't really mean a benefit to the UK because it's not making the type of jobs that we really need. And of course, where are these jobs going? They're going to London. We need more jobs outside of London to be made. But there you go. Of course, in the recent trench poll, the UK in the UK poll, the Tories were at least 21 points behind Labour, which would leave them just 84 seats. While the YouGov poll yesterday said that they were at least 25 points behind. The former International Trade Secretary Liam Fox, who had been tipped to return to the cabinet to help save the Sunak government, wow, that desperate are you, has urged the Prime Minister to start being positive again. He said that since 2016, the year of the EU referendum, the cumulative growth in Italy has been 4%, and in Germany it has been 5.5%, and in the UK it has been 6.8%. Again, this whole idea of going for growth, but you've got to remember, because the EU is technically a collective. If you take Italy's growth at 4% and Germany around 5%, that would make it what 9%, 9.5% if you add those two countries. So it's a lot more than that going on. And of course, again, the UK economy has shrunk because of Brexit. It hasn't really grown. There's a lot of, shall we say, number crunching and fiddling of the numbers to get it to 6.8%. In May last year, British exports to the EU were not just the highest since Brexit, but since records began. Again, that's not true. The UK had the highest growth in any G7 countries in 2021 and 2022. Again, not completely true. And of course, the Eurozone is currently in recession. We are not. Well, that's because we narrowly avoided a recession because we had a slight 1% growth. And again, you say the Eurozone is currently in a recession. That was Germany, who went into recession and had, I think, technically one of the world's shortest recessions ever because of that. And it's funny that he says, "Oh, the Germany's having this growth, but it's in a recession because it's in the Eurozone." Again, it's not you can cherry pick all these minor fragments of information, but unless you're really explaining the big global picture of what's going on, and that the UK really isn't in that too good a position compared to its European neighbours, who again, they are growing slowly. But of course, people like Liam Fox, the free market fundamentalists, so as far as they're concerned, if you're not, growing, they don't care. Meanwhile, the EU growth has been really, really substantiated that slow growth is far better than just, mad, go for growth. And like I say, we'll see what happens when we end up in all the and it comes out of this. So he continues. It's not time. It is not time that we heard more good news talking Britain up. Well, again, that's not true. That we are the fastest, highest growth in the G7 countries. Not 100% true. And he's understood, of course, Mr. Sunak is being urged to bring in more experienced Brexiteers into his cabinet as an expected reshuffle later this month. Oh, that's going to go well. Yeah, you bring in more of these Brexiteers, then what are they going to do? They're going to push for this free market fundamentalist nonsense. And if Sunak actually does and follows through on some of these policies, yeah, it's not going to help. And especially if some of these Brexiteers try to start diverging or anything like that, then that makes our trade and our again trade with our biggest trading partner, the EU, it causes a lot of problems. So if Sunak is really going to bring in, quote, more experienced Brexiteers, that's going to cause some problems. And of course, once again, remember Liam Fox, non-elected MP. I thought we were against these unelected people being in charge of our government. But I guess it's okay if they are Brexiteers. So one name tip to help turn around this narrative is Trade Secretary Liam Fox. A WhatsApp group of Tory MPs has also been set up to help push a more positive approach to help the state of the UK and its Brexit successors. Again, whenever they bring up these Brexit successors, they're not successors. They are cherry-picked individual points that really, when analysed, don't really hold up to scrutiny. Former Brexit Opportunities Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg and a critic of the Sunak government has also waded into the debate. He said this: "We need to cut prices by deregulating." What did I say? What did I say? What did I say about these absolute free market fundamentalist lunatics? That's the only answer they've got. Brexit means we could import cheaper brands from America and abolish food tariffs and make the weekly shopping basket cheaper. Well, what do you do about British manufacturing then, Jacob? What happens when you bringing all these cheap foods, all these cheap stuff? What happens to the businesses here in the UK when you start doing that? Anyway, it goes on to say such Brexit-enabled policies would help to deal with the cost of living crisis. If not, it would make it far, far worse. He said we could also cut costs to other businesses with employment regulations to boost the economy and make net zero rules less onerous. So not only do you want to make it easier for businesses to exploit their employees, which they absolutely would, you also want to get rid of all the UK's net zero commitments. Good job there, Jacob. Brexit is an enabler. It is for the government to act. Except it's not, because if we start deregulating, then guess what? Tariffs with our closest trading partner go up. And they will go up significantly. The EU will retaliate if we deregulate, if we diverge. There is a level playing field in the provision within the withdrawal agreement for a reason. If they do this whole crazy thing that they can claim that they can do, it will have negative consequences for the UK. We've explained this time after time after time after time, but these guys are just absolutely crazy fundamentalist addicts. They will do and say all this stuff without considering any of the consequences or even admitting that there would be negative downsides to what they say. Because again, just like Brexit, all this we do Brexit, it should be working. And of course, oh, Brexit's not to blame. It's because we haven't fulfilled on the promises of Brexit. But everything they are promising to do is the very things that they promised not to do back when they were the Leave campaign in 2016. Anyway, it continues. Let's try and finish this off. So, despite Downing Street claims from Brexiteer MPs, they have believed that the retained EU law bill has been watered down. The government has compromised too much on Northern Ireland, and the UK is getting too close to joining an EU defence pact or army. What? Meanwhile, other MPs in the Red Wall, fighting to hold on to their historic gains made by the Tories in 2019, are also making a similar play. The Dudley North MP, Macro Longy, who is the British trade envoy to Brazil, but the UK has just struck a deal which has already increased trade with one of the world's fastest growing economies. Again, it's a developing economy. Eventually, it will plateau. Why? Because Brazil is developing its economy. Of course, it's going to grow, but that's not reflecting the realities of this. And again, what this mutual agreement is potentially, I don't know. I haven't seen it. This is something I need to go and look up, to be honest, because this is the first time I'm hearing of this. What does this mutual recognition mean? I think it means that Brazil can import products which do not meet our standards because we are going to say we are happy with those standards, even though we have higher product standards here in the UK. If it comes from Brazil, well, we'll take it. Which, again, bad news for British manufacturers, bad news for British consumers. It's a bad time for everyone. He said this party needs to be pulling a more positive case for leaving the EU and its benefits. Again, there aren't. He said, any narrative that talks down an economy will have consequences. Sometimes it feels like some people want things to fail if you listen to their doom and gloom. The economy is not this magic thing where if you talk positively to it, it improves. It is not the whole plant positivity theory where if you play cool calming music it will bloom, or if you play like heavy metal it wilts and fades. That's not how the economy works. And here's the thing, all these crazy free market fundamentalist things that they want to do, like this, have consequences on here in the UK economy, and they do not seem to want to accept that there are going to be these consequences. But he continues, the country voted for a positive, aspirational, outward-looking Great Britain when it voted for Brexit. Quite the opposite of the very insular, negative narratives coming from the Remain arguments. Well, those weren't that. They were like, hey, Brexiteers, you're saying all these positive, outward-looking stuff, but if you do that, there's going to be these consequences. And you say you want to do this, but how are you going to do that? Again, the global Britain. What do you mean when you want to do this? You've got Patrick Minford, the only actual true Brexiteer, running around saying you want to do that. But of course, again, according to your own arguments, we should not have left the single market and customs union. That was a leaver argument from Daniel Hannan. Oh, remember, only a fool would leave the single market and customs union. So, global Britain, unleashed from the shackles of the EU's greater socialist state and its dogma of having led the way out of COVID because of it, now has a fantastic opportunity to motor ahead and lead the way in so many sectors, delivering many more jobs and job security. Except that's not going to happen, because what you want to do is you want to diverge. You want to strip out a ton of worker rights regulations, which are going to make it infinitely worse for people, not better. Because we know what your crazy free market fundamentalist beliefs lead to. We saw it briefly when Liz Truss took over, and yet you want to actually go gun ho for that. Yeah, I don't think your constituents are going to be too happy when they're losing all the jobs because there's all these cheap imports from Brazil or all these other Asian countries as part of the Pacific Partnership are destroying their jobs here. look what happened in America. And look at the fact that America is now putting in protectionist policies because it wants to protect its manufacturing base in the US. Because too many manufacturing jobs left because they pursued your policies. But you want to go even further than that, which, as I've said before, is why it is so terrifying that they are trying to push these policies. Because America only went light, and it took years for that to eventually develop of the negative consequences. These free market fundamentalists and these Brexiteer MPs just want to go hell for leather, and well, yeah, honestly, Liz Truss crashing the economy and almost destroying the UK's pension industries is the least worst thing that could happen if these guys got their way. So the Stoke North MP, Jonathan Gills, who also warned the die-hard Remainers could see an opportunity to take the UK back into the EU if the Conservative government does not start being positive again. He said, with die-hard Remainers regrouping, the government needs to continue delivering on its huge benefits of Brexit. Again, what are those benefits of Brexit? And it's mostly, oh, let's diverge. But again, they don't talk about the consequences, or they're not interested in having that conversation about those consequences. So, contrary to the Ramonas talking Britain down, our economy has grown faster than Germany. Again, not true. France, Spain, and Italy overall since 2020. And we have signed trade deals with Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, again, alongside joining the Pacific Partnership, which is worth a staggering, again, 11 trillion. Again, just because it is worth that doesn't mean, again, we are going to gain any benefit from that. Your own impact assessments state that. We've talked about how bad the New Zealand and Australia trade deals are. The Japan trade deal benefits Japan far more than it does us. Again, it's not a true reflection of what's really going on. But he continues, Brexit wasn't just about economics. Well, again, this is where we get to the whole Brexit was anything we want to be, which I've always talked about. It was just an amorphous blob. Brexit was about economics, it was about trade, and it was about sovereignty, and it was about anything else. Because if they were to actually start talking about that one thing, then they would have to get specific. That's why they can go, oh, but Brexit wasn't just about economics. No, we can start talking about something else. And now we can start talking about something else, because they do not want to have the deeper conversations about what the consequences of their actions would be if you were to implement them. So, Brexit wasn't just about economics. We have restored our sovereignty so that we can control our own laws and borders by giving back power to the British people rather than the bureaucrats in Brussels. So, this seems to be the big Brexit plan that Rishi Sunak, if this does happen, to bring in more Brexiteers into the government. Good luck. Good luck, because if they are serious, if they are actually serious about this and they start to actually produce their policies, then guess what? The Tory chances of losing just increase astronomically. Because one key point, and people forget this, one key point of the big Leave campaign was that you'd had all these Brexiteers coming up to the north saying, oh, we're going to re-bring back British manufacturing. We're going to re-bring back all these benefits that we lost from, again, joining the EU. Again, not obviously talking about, there was, Margaret Thatcher that, deindustrialized the north. And it was her policies that did that, not being in the EU. So the second these start to do this and you start to see jobs just leave, and of course, where are they going to leave first? They're going to leave the north first. Do you think these areas that heavily voted for Brexit are going to vote Conservative again? No, they're already changing their mind already, because they feel that the Conservatives have not followed through, certainly on their promises to help level up these places. And one of the things I always say to people who were obsessed or voted for the Conservatives with levelling up. Well, if that was your big primary concern, why did you not vote Remain? Because the EU constantly put money into places in the north to help it develop. It had access to all those regional and help structural funds that you no longer have access to. And guess what? The EU was giving you far, far, far more money than what is available to you from these levelling up funds, the shared prosperity fund that the Conservatives made. It's literally pennies compared to what we used to get from the EU. So, if this is their grand plan, to go out and start talking up the positives of Brexit, oh, please do, because you actually have to start talking about what it is you want to do. And not only are the Brexiteers and all these pro Brexit people that wanted Brexit fighting amongst themselves because they can't decide what Brexit actually means, they can't even actually agree on what they want to do. As we said at the beginning, take Kimi Badnoch and the other, hardcore ERG Brexiteers at the committee that she was on that time, arguing about she won't be an arsonist. And the second you diverge, businesses are going to outcry. They're going to go, whoa, what are you doing? You're disrupting our trade with the EU. You're costing us billions. What are these companies going to do? Well, they're going to go, well, look, if we've got an arm in the EU, off we go to the EU. You're going to see British companies downsize because if you're locking it out from that market through the deregulation, they're going to downsize, which is going to lead to job losses. And then if you are now saying that these British companies now have to compete against all these cheap imports, again, according to Jacob Rees-Mogg, we can import all this cheap stuff from America and Asia and Brazil. What do you think is going to happen to them then? And this is the conversation they do not want to have. But it's the conversation we should force them to have. And to be honest, if they feel so confident in talking up all this stuff, as you see very often from things like this is where we have to start nailing them down on specifics. We have to really start getting them on this and actually start telling them about, oh, if you do this, this will be the consequence of your policy, of your actions. This is your Brexit. This is not what people voted for in 2016. Because most of the people in the North heavily voted and believed the rhetoric of the Brexiteers that this was going to re-energize the North. It was going to re-bring back all these areas. It was going to restart British manufacturing. Meanwhile, you had Patrick Minford, who again was wheeled out and then wheeled into a corner very quickly when they realized this, basically saying the exact opposite of what all the Brexiteers were saying that, British manufacturing, British farming was going to be destroyed by doing Brexit. That would be a good thing, apparently. But again, that's Patrick Minford, the absolute clown economist of Brexit. So, as always, thank you very much for joining us. Like I say, it's been a bit of a long one today. And of course, as always, thank you very much for joining us. And of course, please do remember to click the like, share, and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.